Design.
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 Design means to plan.
Human.
Substance.
Technology.
Designing for a better future.
What is design really?
Let's talk about design.
Making an impact in the world.
The power of design to improve life.
Design to survive.
From the beginning of time, our ancestors relied on three basic forms of energy: their own human muscle, plants and animals for food, and the burning of biomass like wood for heat, light, and protection. Life was simple, but growth was slow. Fast forward to the Industrial Revolution and the discovery of fossil fuels. We dug deep into the earth to discover carbon-rich deposits made from decomposing plants and organisms that we now know as coal, oil, and gas.
The men going to work can see the freight trains bringing in the raw materials: iron ore, coal, and limestone.
And today, these fuels, which have taken millennia to produce, supply about 80% of the world's energy. But both mining and burning these limited resources have taken their toll, and now experts warn that energy emissions must be halved within the decade if we're to avoid a planet warmed beyond repair. While many countries are thriving on wind, solar, and hydropower, others remain in the tight grasp of fossil fuels. And even with the best efforts to transition the globe entirely to clean energy, would it be enough to beat the ticking clock and the rising numbers on the thermometer? Perhaps we need an alternative.
There are essentially two things that happen inside a nuclear reactor. The reactivity which generates power either goes up or it goes down. That's it.
When we hear nuclear energy, for many of us, our first thought is disaster. We think of the tragedies like Chernobyl that claimed thousands of lives, caused countless illnesses, and left a permanent scar in the landscape.
What just happened? It's exploded. We know. We get the backup pumps running. We need water moving through the core. That is all that matters. There is no core.
While it has a dark past and an unpredictable present, many still argue that nuclear must be part of our energy future. It remains one of our most efficient energy producers to date, able to generate, in rain, hail, or a lack of sunshine, up to 3 times more energy per power plant than its clean competitors. But the question remains, can we redesign nuclear to make it both safe and sustainable? Welcome to Can Design Save Us, a series exploring design as a pioneering force for good. We dive into the most pressing problems of our time and meet people using design to solve them. We explore the good, bad, complex, and controversial. My name is Lesley Price, host from the Index Project, and my guest today is Ask Jensen, COO and co-founder of Seaborg Technologies, a Danish startup reinventing nuclear power. And so welcome, Ask. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you.
As we talked before, you have a pretty diverse background. Mm-hmm. Do you call yourself a physicist or an environmentalist? What do you generally prefer?
Yeah, that's a good question. I call myself a scientist, I think.
Okay.
But that's a story that's not entirely true anymore, because what I'm doing today is a lot of administration and management too. So the drive for all of it is environmentalism. I think that's where our vision started. My drive comes from.
Mm-hmm. You also have a really interesting upbringing, one that you wouldn't necessarily associate with going into nuclear power. Could you tell us a bit about that?
Yeah, so I grew up in a collective, NOAA, Friends of the Earth collective, with my parents and another family. There were actually 3. There was another grown-up living there to begin with, but he moved shortly after I was born. But yes, NOAA, Friends of the Earth collective, which is, they had very strong values in terms of environmentalism, both environment, and it wasn't called climate at the time, right? You were talking about the environment and nature, mm-hmm. But it was about reducing the pollution to the air and not putting things in our food that shouldn't be there. And I think those values were an integral part of my upbringing.
So would you call yourself a Danish hippie in that sense? At least from the
I wouldn't call myself
back
a
in the
hippie,
day.
but they were part of the '68 movement in that sense in many ways. They were also a strong part of the anti-nuclear movement. I mean, the sister of one of the other people from the collective has been maintaining the rights to this logo up until recently. But I think all of that was part of the drive to ensure that there wasn't pollution, which is still something that I value. I still have that with me.
So when you guys founded Seaborg, you're 5 physicists. Tell us a bit about that. How was there an aha moment, or how did it come about?
No, so it really came about because we were just, we were friends. We knew each other from different professional networks, from CERN and the Niels Bohr Institute, but also just because we had been working together and brewing beer together. And when you brew beer, you have 5 hours in a weekend where you have a lot of time to talk. And we talked about energy and climate and the crisis that we thought we were going into, right? And we were pessimistic about the technology that existed today. So we talked about what can we actually do? What can we do to actually reach a carbon-neutral society? And that's when we started talking about old nuclear designs. Not what we know of as nuclear power today, but some of the reactor designs and way of harvesting this power that were thought of in the beginning and that are very different from what we know of as nuclear power today.
So that was a design that you mentioned, it was from the 60s. And you guys basically took that design, and I think you were explaining to me before that it was probably not viable to develop back in the day, but you guys found a way to make it work.
Yeah, so actually it was developed.
Okay.
There's been several prototypes. There was one running in the US for 5 years. So a very long time, but it was a prototype reactor, a demonstration reactor, or a research, you might call it. So it was rather small in the amount of energy it produced. And that means something to how long the materials can actually last. And one of the concerns or issues with commercializing at the time was that the materials couldn't handle the higher energies you would need for a commercial reactor. That was one part. The other part was that you couldn't calculate what would actually happen. I mean, you simply didn't have the computer power that you need to understand such a reactor. And we've only had that for, say, the last 15 years. So it's a rather new thing that we can actually model and understand what will happen before it happens, which is a good thing with nuclear.
Yes, I can imagine. Yeah, we talked about that it's in some ways predicting the future, or at least predicting scenarios and being able to tell that it's going to be safe. But the reactor you guys work with, can you explain us how does it work in layman's terms?
Yeah, so it's called a molten salt reactor, the type of reactor. And now the listener won't be able to see, but I often walk around with a crystal in my pocket.
Did you bring it today?
I did bring one. I can
Okay.
I can
We
take
can
it from the
describe
back.
it, yeah.
So it looks. So the one I have right now is not the exact version we use, but one you can buy in stores in Denmark, because it's just a crystal and it looks nice. It's supposed to give you creative vibrations, but it looks
something
typically
you have on the bedside table.
Exactly.
Good vibes,
Imagine a light green crystal. It could also be purple. They come in different variations of color. But the thing is that it's based on fluorides along with other elements, and fluoride has this feature that it creates very strong chemical bonds to other elements. And that means when we, so first of all, if you heat it up above 500 degrees, it turns into a liquid. It melts and turns into a liquid, and it behaves much like water. It even looks like water. It's nearly transparent. But at that temperature, there's no pressure still, because that's just the melting point. And you can keep it liquid until 1500 degrees. So for 1000 degrees temperature span, it's still liquid without boiling. And the thing is, you can mix radioactive fuels into that, and they become strongly bound. So first of all, if you have this in your reactor, instead of these normal fuel rods that need cooling, that acts as the cooling mechanisms, the salt. So you can, and because it's strongly bound with the fuel, you never have a risk of losing your coolant, so to speak. And losing coolant was the main factor of all the accidents that we know, and that's what went wrong. It was that you lost the water and the ability to cool these fuel rods, and they melted, and out came gases, radioactive gases and other stuff, which is the concern. Now in the salt, these gases, they are bound, they're strongly bound, so even if a meteor hits our reactor. The salts,
that would be
an
certainly a
extreme
phenomenon.
scenario, right?
Yeah.
Let's take a simpler one. Let's take terrorism, which should be a concern, right?
Definitely.
Somebody actually bombs that plant with something really, really heavy. I mean, it's not easy to get to the reactor, first of all. But even if that happened and the salt comes out, it's going to solidify. It's going to come out like a lava, like a fluid, but it's going to cool down and solidify. And everything is going to be bound within that salt.
So it'll be like, it's like a protective barrier that would contain it rather than it's sort of leaking out into the environment. Okay.
And most importantly, you don't get these highly volatile gases, as they're called, the cesium and iodine, that will go into the air or water and get around. They are bound in that salt.
Yeah, I think I liked last time that you said it was, it's impossible to melt down, and that it's basically, it follows the laws of physics, so there's no way that it can happen, basically.
No, so what people have done in nuclear power plants today is that they made engineering solutions that makes it safe. And you have so much redundancy, you have backup systems for every backup system. So I actually think the plants being built today are extremely safe, but they've become very big and costly because you need so much extra safety. We can cut that away without reducing the safety, because we have these natural laws that actually govern the processes. An important feature is also that the plant is self-adjusting in the sense that if we don't actively keep it going, it's going to shut itself down. So opposed to a system where you need to actively control it, we need to actually actively keep it going. And it will shut itself down otherwise, which is a very important feature, of course, right?
In the introduction, we touched on, of course, we talked about other renewables. And of course, a lot of experts argue that nuclear needs to be part of the solution. Why is it needed, sort of in your view? I know some people talk about efficiency, that it is so much more efficient in terms of production.
I like to take one step back, because I did the mistake at some point to try to do an estimate of how much carbon we actually dug up.
Right.
So I looked at the estimates for coal and oil and gas and all these things, and you get a number out. Let's call that number 35 units. It's a lot. It's probably gigatons, but anyway, that's the amount. And then I looked at what's the total biomass on the Earth's surface, so trees and animals, not excluding bacteria in the ground, but still plants and wildlife on Earth. And that number is nearly exactly the same. So in other words, the amount of carbon that we pulled out of the Earth to the atmosphere since the 70s mainly is the same amount that's bound in all plant life on Earth's surface.
Yeah,
so that gives you an idea of the scale of the problem, right? A lot of that is locally bound again, right? So it's not all of that we need to pull out. But the challenge is huge. And we can only get so far with solar and wind. I mean, that's going to be a lot more of that, and it's going to be cheaper, and we're going to get more of that, and we're going to get a lot of other technologies that are going to be a part of the problem. So let me give you an example. In Southeast Asia alone, outside of India and China, 240 coal power plants are under construction or planned right now. 240 new coal power plants, right? And the reason is that the energy consumption is growing. The economies there are growing. People are getting more wealthy. They're getting the needs for simple stuff like clean water and electricity. It's not just materialisms, right? It's also the very basic things.
Yep.
It's the essentials that require a lot of energy. And they simply cannot follow with or keep up by building solar or wind. I mean, it's the countries that are Indonesia, for instance, a lot of islands that are difficult to connect. And so you need something else that's stable and centralized and inexpensive. And coal power is the answer there right now. And that is the challenge. We need to find a technology that can directly replace those coal power plants, and within a short time frame, right? So that's basically what we are building.
So you envision it's basically going to leapfrog all the renewables. Is that sort of what you guys hope for?
I think it's going to complement
those areas.
It's going to complement them. But yeah, there's some areas where it's difficult to get a lot of solar and wind. But I think even in Europe and other parts of the world, it's difficult to simply scale up at the pace we need to. If you look to too few technologies, we need more. I mean, the amount of energy production we need to replace is huge, and the amount of new build is even bigger when you look to Africa and South America, and Africa especially with some time, but still in the not so distant future.
And my number's correct, was it 80% that it is still of the world's energy that's still fossil fuels? Is that correct?
Yeah. So I think solar and wind alone corresponds to around 5%.
Okay, that's
which is
a little
problem,
bit
right?
grim, isn't it? Yeah.
It's going to become more. And
Yeah.
it's more when you look at electricity, but it's still so little compared to the amount of energy in the world.
Mm-hmm.
And that is a challenge.
Definitely.
Yeah.
So when we talk about the numbers, one reactor that Seaborg would create, how many households could that power, for example?
Yeah, so we're not the only company developing this type of technology. There's actually a lot of competition. One of them is TerraPower, funded by Bill Gates. Now they're designing rather large plants, central reactors of a gigawatt in size. That's pretty big, supplying many households of power. We wanted to go more decentral, to be able to deploy this in areas that are somewhat less developed. It's still a lot of energy that we produce. So each module will produce enough energy for 200,000 households. That's electricity and heating. And we're going to put these reactors on a barge, a ship without an engine, basically, that can be dragged into a port where it's then stationary. Mm-hmm. But that barge will deliver energy for beginning at 400,000 households and up to 1 million households if we scale it up.
So in that sense, they also, as you said, that it's also easier to just sort of sail these barges into areas that require the power.
Yeah, so this ties into one of the big barriers for nuclear power today, that when you build a power plant, you basically fly in 6,000 educated people, highly educated people, to build it at the site.
Right.
And the risk of mistakes when you build stuff at the site when it's not centrally produced is so much higher.
Mm-hmm.
So it requires a lot of more governance and quality control and all these things to just make sure that these 6,000 people are coordinated. Mm-hmm. We want to turn that. The analog would be that you order a car and 16 engineers from Germany arrive in your garage and build it there, which is insane, right?
Yeah, that's a great analogy.
We want to turn that around. Mm-hmm. So we want to build these power plants centrally in South Korea, on the shipyards in South Korea, and then ship them to where they need to produce power. But that means we assemble everything there with the highest quality possible and at a lot lower cost than conventional nuclear power plants today, because it can be done centralized. And then we ship it. And it's nearly plug and play. Obviously, you still need some infrastructure for the grid, but actually connecting that batch, it's not that difficult, especially in harbors, where you often have grid connections. Mm-hmm. So it allows us to build them much more efficiently at a fast scale, and also to get them connected. But most importantly, it drives down costs massively. Mm-hmm. So it makes it a very inexpensive product in the end. And the whole idea is that we need to compete with coal directly without subsidies. We need to outcompete coal on price. And that's our actual target.
So based on your predictive models, is this something, of course, it's something that you guys see as being very feasible? Not to say that it's going to be an easy feat whatsoever.
Yeah, so from the prototype in the 60s, we changed the central material called a moderator, which we didn't believe the original choice could actually work in a commercial reactor. So we have a new patented moderator, which is one of our edges. Also one of the reasons we can build it that small that we actually do. And that obviously needs to be approved. And the regulatory path is not simple. I think it's I know it's the hardest in the world for any technology, basically.
Yeah.
So, and we need to go through that. We just passed the first phase of that, announced that a month ago, and we're very happy with that.
Yeah.
Yes, it's a big thing. It's actually, we're the first in the world for a commercial phase 1 approval like that.
Wow,
so,
okay,
yeah.
Massive milestone.
But there's still several phases to get through before we have the commercial reactor on market.
When it comes to jumping back a little bit, when we talked about, of course, your upbringing, public perception around nuclear. For one, I'd like to know, how did it go when you had to tell your parents what you were working on?
Yeah. So I was scared.
Yeah, I can imagine, yeah.
No, perhaps not really scared. I talk well with my parents, but still it was an intimidating experience having to talk about something they feel so passionately about, so strongly about. And that ties into, the anti-nuclear movement basically started in Denmark. The world movement basically started here. A girl from Aarhus called Astrid drew that logo.
Wow.
So there's a lot of emotions in play in Denmark, and I think there's also a huge success. I mean, we said no the year before Chernobyl. So there's a lot of history in the country and culture around being anti-nuclear. Mm-hmm. But what also happened is that I think people realized that technology today is different. Mm-hmm. A lot happened. I mean, we're talking more than 50 years. Imagine what happened with cars or with everything else in those years. I mean, we're basically on horse carriage that time, right? So people also, I think the view has actually changed somewhat today in Denmark. People are more open to actually hear about it. They might still be skeptical about nuclear power, which is good to be, but they're also more open to actually hear about it. And my parents, because it was their son perhaps, but they actually listened. But when they heard the potential and what we could actually do with this technology, I think that also changed their views on it. And I think one of the really interesting experiences has been that we've been very afraid that we would have very strong opponents from green movements, from all kind of NGOs or whatnot. And I think
have you?
People are critical, but no, I think on the contrary, at least in Denmark,
people
who talk to us, they say, okay, if you can actually live up to the potential that you promise, then we think this is interesting. We still want to see you do that. We still want to be a guard dog, making sure that you actually live up to what you say. Mm-hmm. But if you can make that, I mean, one of the things I didn't talk about is that we can actually recycle spent fuel with this technology. Mm-hmm. We can't eliminate the problem totally, but we can reduce it significantly. We can reuse our own fuel. Mm-hmm. And that has been one of the other major concerns, right, along with the safety of it.
Because right now, I mean, that nuclear material is just out there in the world. Well, not out there, but I mean, once it's there, it's permanent.
Yeah. That has been one of the concerns that the long-lived waste, as it's called, is still there, and we can reuse a significant amount of that and reduce the amount significantly. Mm-hmm.
And is it the lifespan? I think you mentioned that it was 12 years for a reactor. Is that?
Yeah. So each reactor module. So basically, what we're going to do when we ship this barge, imagine a ship that is dragged to some port, then it's stationary there, and it runs for 12 years. After 12 years, we actually replace these core modules, the reactor core modules, put in new ones with new fuel, and then it runs for another 12 years. It's completely closed in those 12 years. Mm-hmm. There's no refueling, there's no things going in and out. And it's a total lifespan of 24 years. Mm-hmm. And after those 24 years, we take the entire batch and send it back to a central facility that handles it. Mm-hmm. So it means it's also completely greenfield or green harbor after we finish producing energy there.
Mm-hmm. How has it been with investors? You guys have got a lot of big investments, the Design to Improve Life Fund being one of them. But what's the general perception? I can imagine people are just very, very excited to jump on board. Yeah, what's your experience with that?
I mean, we've been very honest about that, especially from the beginning. This is risky in the sense that it's a company wanting to do technology development, to mature it, to bring a product to market that's not easy to build. Mm-hmm. And it's not just the tech, it's also the regulatory pathways, and it's the public perception. There's so many barriers to this product, if you call it that, in terms of a normal thing. What I do think is that we've been vision-driven from the start. We thought this was simply the right thing to do. And I think we've convinced the investors to begin with that despite being very honest about the risk, they actually agree that this is something that's needed and that this is actually the right time to take that risk for a new reactor type, a new type of nuclear power. This is the right time to look into those options. Mm-hmm. And that we are still far enough that it's actually worth taking that risk because they now believe that we can go all the way. But I think, the people who joined us 3 years ago, they knew that this was a risky endeavor, and they joined.
And a long-term plan.
We weren't only physicists at the time, but still, there's got to be some trust to the people in the team. And I actually think the trust in the team is still one of our strengths, that both from our part and from our investors' part, that they can see that we've managed to get people from 5 continents, more than 12 nationalities to join the team. Mm-hmm. And that alone is an achievement, I think.
Yeah, definitely. You went from 5 guys basically here in Denmark to how many are you now?
I think we're 35 now if you include students and interns. And
And still growing, I would imagine.
Yeah, if Corona allows, we will hire 50 the coming year, but let's see how fast we can get them in.
Was it a similar... I know you mentioned before that people had heard of Seaborg from abroad and that... it was, I wouldn't say easy to recruit people, but I'm sure it's...
I mean, we are blown away every day at the moment about how people from far, far away have actually heard about the company and heard about what we do, and actually that they want to work with us. They share that passion or that vision for doing something. I mean, I think one of the first team members that really made an impact on me was an engineer from Argentina moving with his entire family. And this is more than a year ago now, that moved with everybody to Denmark just to be part of Seaborg and work here. Despite we were honest also at that time about that we still need to close further investment rounds to make this continue. And there's, even though we can give some guarantees, we can't give a 10-year employment guarantee because, I mean, that's not part of the game as a startup. But they shared the vision and the drive and I think the interest for doing what we're doing.
Do you still consider yourselves a startup? I feel like you guys have graduated a little bit more.
I think it's not right to use that word anymore, no.
Okay.
I mean, in many ways, you could call us a startup for a long time, right? And there's a lot of the scale-up things and all the problems and challenges and fun tasks we struggle with that are the same as for other startups. But I think we are also one of the world-leading developers of this reactor type now. And I mean, we are at the same level as some of the, what I would call major companies now trying to do the same.
I mean, something backed by Gates, right?
Yeah.
I mean, do you guys really, do you pay attention to that stuff, or is your sort of product, as you said, when you're really focused on making it affordable and smaller, do you keep an eye on your competitors?
I would say, so we've changed also our image over the last year. We need to be more corporate in the sense that we need international partners of the best quality you can imagine. And we signed some partnerships that we are really proud of during the last year. But we need a supply chain that helps from Europe, that helps deliver everything from pumps to heat exchangers and these things. And we need suppliers that we can trust will actually deliver when we are ready. And for them to commit, they must know that we are actually serious and that we are not just 5 physicists in a basement. That we actually are a very strong team.
Brewing beer.
Exactly. Yeah. So we are in a transition where we're changing both our image and also who we actually are. I mean, we are becoming a big business. We still want to keep a lot of that culture, the passion and the drive and the mission-driven team. I think it's still a very important value for us.
Absolutely.
And it's still one that we have. And I think we're going to stick with that, hopefully forever.
Well, I'm sure you will. I mean, if you've got people moving from all over the world to join, I can imagine that the mission obviously is the major part of it. When we talk about implementation, what sort of time frame are we looking at, or what will the fully rolled out scenario look like? So
the current plan, and I mean, I talked a bit about risks already. Let me start there actually. So there's 3 risks to that could delay this. One is a technical. We still need to get our moderator approved to use. There's other, technical design challenges that needs to be solved. We're well underway with a lot of that, but that takes time. And then there's a regulatory path. We need to get approval for all these steps, and that takes time by itself. And then we have
that red tape.
The last risk, which is, everything else that you have in a company, right? And a normal startup. So
back to the administration discussion again.
Exactly. Yeah. No. So the current timeline allows us to have the first reactor ready by 2025 already, and commercial in 2026 or 27. And that is very fast compared to both competitors and also the challenges that we are facing, right? We need some technologies before 2030 to help mitigate climate change, right?
Of course, yeah. Where will the reactor go? Do you guys know that yet, or is that classified?
No. So the primary market is definitely Southeast Asia, for sure. There's huge energy demand there. There's a lot of countries that are also more pro-nuclear than in the West, which makes it easier to start the negotiations. Even though we're different, there's still a lot of rules in Europe that could be difficult to get around to begin with, basically, because the laws are not defined in Europe to some extent. They're defined around the old conventional reactor types. And it might be easier to start in some countries that are not bound by that history, basically.
Perhaps where you can make the biggest impact as well, I would imagine.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a huge impact. A city like Jakarta is seriously considered being moved, or that the capital is moved to somewhere else because there's so big concerns with getting water.
All right.
I mean, one of the most simple things that you need for life, right? And that is concerns several places that energy are needed for water and for electricity, and also for the scaling industry. It could also be for something like hydrogen production or synfuel production for the ships. I mean, Southeast Asia has a lot of the cargo that we get in Europe. All the shipping, there are major hubs there. And those ships need to sail on something else. And it's not easy to produce that. Having a reactor that 24/7 can produce energy for synfuels is a good choice for that. So that might be one of the starting,
Do you guys have a buyer lined up? How does that work?
Come again?
Do you have a buyer lined up? How does it work? Like once you have the reactor ready?
Yeah.
Or when does that process sort of kick off?
So there's some things I can't really disclose now.
Fair enough.
But we drive the customer relations together with some of our partners. And it's a bit too early to have an actual customer yet, because we want to be a bit further in that process. But it's one of the things that we will drive a lot the coming years. It's very different from country to country how that is actually done. For some countries, it will need to be the state, whereas for other countries, it'll be a company, state-owned typically, but still a company.
The energy sector as a whole, how do you see it evolving, or how would you hope to see it evolve?
So I think we have a challenge that we don't realize how big a part fossil fuels still plays in like the infrastructure of the energy sector. I mean,
particularly living here in Denmark.
Exactly, even in Denmark. And there's so many aspects that we need to change. But I also see a lot of change happening. I think there's going to be a lot more wind and solar. There's going to be more intermittent energy where you have the resources for water that's going to be used. I think the main challenge is going to be all the places where it's difficult to build wind and solar, what we're actually going to do there. I think we're not going to reach the target without some type of nuclear. I think that's very difficult. Even in scenarios where we cut down the energy consumption in Europe a lot, we still need so much more power. I mean, the IPCC, UN's climate panel, which is not a holy grail, but still they make these reports on what we need to do. And even in their most pessimistic scenario in terms of nuclear power, they still said we needed to double our capacity the next 30 years in Europe or everywhere in the world to actually reach those goals. And even if we cut down on, say, energy consumption in the West, there's so much new energy needed in the rest of the world for heating, for electricity, for fueling cars and all these things that it's really difficult to imagine us reaching that goal without some kind of nuclear power. And I think our vision has been to come up with a new type of nuclear power that actually meets the demand that we want it to. Yeah.
Do you envision this being something that you will dedicate your life to? Of course, we talk to a lot of people where they're just serial entrepreneurs and they come up with one idea, they develop it, and then they move on. Or do you sort of feel like this is something that you're committed to, married to, perhaps?
I think I already took that decision 5 years ago, yes.
Okay. There's no getting out of it.
No, we knew from the beginning. Actually, when we started, we thought the fastest we could do this, even in the most ambitious plans, would be to have a reactor ready by 2030. And that was a timescale we were looking at when we started the company, right? So being able to have something on market several years before that, or at least a perspective of that, is really fantastic for us. But I think, it is a marriage, yes.
I can imagine the relationships between the five of you must be strong, also strained at times.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like any startup, it's
strong.
always a roller coaster ride, right?
Yeah.
You get your ups and downs, and we're still going to get those ups and downs as a company. It's not necessarily us, the original founders, that take all the responsibility and blame themselves upon them, but it's we're going to have those ups and downs as a team, right? Still.
Absolutely. Yeah. As a man of science, are you optimistic that we can reach those targets? Or what's your...
No, I'm pessimistic because I think you need to make sure that you actually work hard to get there, right? I think the challenge is huge. Mm-hmm. I'm positive in the sense that I think it is possible.
Mm-hmm.
So it is possible to actually reach those targets. But I think it's going to be extremely difficult. And I'm sure we're going to miss the first targets by a lot. So it depends on how fast we can move from 2030 onwards.
Mm-hmm.
What people are not talking about yet is that we don't just need to reduce the amount of carbon that we emit, or greenhouse gases that we emit, but we actually need to pull those gases out of the atmosphere again.
Mm-hmm.
We need negative emissions in Europe in 2050. So we need machines that pull gases out of the air and store them somewhere. It could be just trees. But as you might recall, the first thing I said this about how much carbon we emitted to the air.
Right.
It's a lot of trees we need to plant.
Yeah. So we'd say we need several strategies.
Yeah.
But then would you balance out and call yourself a realist then?
Yes. I think we sometimes use the word pragmatists. And I don't really like that word. None of us do. But the thing is that we are realists, visionary realists, you might call it. But looking at the scale of the problem and what is actually needed. Which is also why we wanted to build these things so they can be mass produced, basically on shipyards that can produce a lot. Because any technology that makes or needs to make an impact in the future needs to be able to scale to actually make that impact.
Right.
Yeah.
But it's such a amazing. I mean, we've just loved you guys at Seaborg at the Index Project, obviously, and we're really looking forward to following your journey. And it's going to be a long-term relationship, as we also talked about being investors as well. So we're really excited to see how it all unfolds.
We're going to stick around.
Great. Yeah. Thanks so much, Ask, for your time.
I might just, as a final word, say that I'm still good friends with my parents. So,
oh, good, yes. Good. Yeah, I'm glad we got that in there. Brilliant. Thanks so much.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you for listening to Can Design Save Us by the Index Project. I'm your host, Lesley Price, and this episode was produced by Sidsel, Kaae, Nørgaard, with music by Kristina, Lilleskov. Join us for the next episode where we explore diversity and the decolonization of design.